Hello, human geographers. We are back for another lecture tonight. We are beginning our discussion tonight on language, our next chapter in our culture unit. Uh, a personal favorite of mine because there's just so many interesting little facts and elements that we could talk about. It's really fascinating. It's something that maybe down the road I'd really like to teach, like just a standalone class on this because it's just really so fascinating. So let's go ahead and dive in. So let's take a look at what is language. Our first definition of this unit: a system of communication through the use of speech, a collection of sounds understood by a group of people to have the same meaning. Now, the part that I really want to make sure every single person has underlined there is use of speech, because language is not necessarily written. It for sure has to be spoken as far as our definitions go, but it doesn't necessarily have to be written. There's actually lots of languages that lack what we will call a literary tradition, that lack a written component. And in fact, for many of those languages, it actually puts them at greater risk of language extinction, because there's not the more tangible artifacts, the physical manifestation of that language to carry on over time. And so that actually puts them at greater risk of language extinction, because as soon as the native speakers and the people who know the language stop speaking it, they die, whatever may happen, that language could be gone forever. And so that makes things really kind of difficult. So about how many languages are there today? There's about 7,000, but you're going to see a lot of different numbers with regards to that. I would say probably most consistently I see somewhere in the neighborhood of about 5,000 to 7,000 as far as the number there. The number 7,000 though actually comes from another source, and they were talking about language extinction. And this was a statistic that was given regarding it. And that is that one language disappears every 14 days. Every 2 weeks, there is a language that is gone forever. And if there isn't that literary tradition, if there isn't some kind of evidence of that, of what that language was, or we don't document those languages, then there's absolutely no evidence that that language ever existed. And so this is going to be something that we continue to talk about as the unit goes on. All right, a couple more definitions for you. Standard language versus official language. Here's the definition of standard language: a language substantially uniform with respect to spelling, grammar, pronunciation, and vocabulary, and representing the approved community norm of the tongue. What I typically associate with the standard language is kind of the language that's used in everyday life. You know, you're in a community, what language is used throughout that community? When people are saying hi to their neighbors, you know, what language are they speaking? That kind of a thing. That's the standard language. And then official language is here's the definition: a governmentally designated language of instruction, of government, of the courts, and other official, public, and private communication. So this is really important because we're going to see kind of the difference between first language, standard language, and official language here in just a moment. Essentially what official language is the language of the government. And one statistic that I like to bring up with regards to official language is the fact that the United States of America as a country does not have an official language. Now, we do have a language, we would probably say the standard language of our government is English, because all the documents that are published, laws, our Constitution, it's all written in English. But there isn't a language that is officially designated, meaning, and this is something where you can kind of see the subtle nuanced differences between it, is that if you need to go and get a government document and you don't speak English, they can get you that form in another language. Whereas if there was an official language, if the official language was English, then that may not be the case. So there's a couple statistics that I'd like to give you guys right now. Several states have designated an official language. Up to this point, about 29 states have as an official language English, and this was part of a movement that started in the 1980s and continued largely into the 1990s, and still even continues to this day, called the English-only movement. And it sought that English would be the only language of the government, which, to be clear, wouldn't do anything to promote English because those documents are already available in English. It would just mean that that's the only language that you would be able to get documents in, all right? It wouldn't increase the number of documents available in English. It would just limit the number of documents in other languages. So that's what it was. But under the Civil Rights Act of 1964, in order to receive federal money, states still have to provide documents in languages other than English if someone were to request it and things like that. So that's something that's kind of interesting. Even those states that have English as their official language, in order to receive federal money, still have to provide documents in other languages as well. Couple other things. New Mexico was the only state that was legally bilingual as stated by its state constitution, but that was actually only a temporary provision. It was only written in for about 20 years, and it was continued on for a while after that through continuances and things like that. But as of right now, New Mexico, along with where English and Spanish are the two most widely spoken languages and essentially the two official languages there. Maine and Louisiana also are essentially bilingual with English and French, and Hawaii is the only legally bilingual state as of right now. English, it was actually part of the English-only movement with English, but also recognized Native Hawaiian language as an official state language as well. Alrighty, so let's go ahead and take a look here at what could essentially be a top 10 for us. So on the left-hand side, we've got a top 10 on first languages. And then on the right, we have a top 10 official languages. So as we often do with top 10s, I want you to take a moment and instead of charting it on a map, I just want you to write down some of your notes and observations. What do you notice? What are some major differences that you notice between these two charts with regards to first language, what could kind of be a synonym perhaps to standard language, and official languages? What are some of the things that you notice? And hopefully one of the things that you wrote down, one of the things that you noticed is that there's kind of a big discrepancy there with English, right? English is the second most widely used first language in the world, but it's by far and away the largest official language in the world. So I want you to pose a hypothesis to this. What could possibly explain the extensive use of English as an official language? Why do you think so many people have as the language of government English when they don't really speak it as a first language? And I want you to answer that question on your notes, but we're going to go ahead and answer it in a later lecture. So let's see how you do with that. All right, so let's get started in this with the structure of how language is classified. And that's the main topic of this lecture, is language classification. This is, without a doubt, something that you absolutely have to know. Put a gigantic star next to this slide. You absolutely need to know this order. You need to be able to answer questions about how it moves up and down, the specific examples for specific language families, So you absolutely have to know this. Expect questions on my test. I would expect questions on the AP exam because it's confusing. And this is something that the writers of the AP exam can use to differentiate students to really see how well they know something. And so let's take a look at it. At the very top, we have language families. This is as far back in history as we can go to show a connection between languages. Then we have language branches, language groups, languages, dialects, and finally accents. Now, what I want you to, the visual that I like to associate with this is something of an hourglass shape. So kind of make an hour, kind of draw an hourglass next to your notes, because I want you to understand why this is. And so you have the visual, now let's kind of explain it. Because a language family is going to have a lot of different languages into it, all right? Like 45% of the world's people speak an Indo-European language. That's a lot of languages, okay? And then there's going to be fewer languages spoken at the language branch level. Still fewer down to the language groups until you get to just a single language. Let's say English or Hindi or French. You narrow it down to just that single language. But then within each language, now that's the pinch point of your hourglass, right? Within each language, there might be several dialects. Think American English versus British English. Okay, 2 different dialects. That's more than the number of languages because we just have a single language, English, but 2 dialects. Then you're going to have several different accents. You might have multiple accents or various accents depending on where they are in these different regions. And so it starts to expand out a little bit further. So that's kind of why the visual, the hourglass shape perhaps helps, because it explains that. So hopefully that helps, but you absolutely, without a doubt, will need to know this classification system. So let's go ahead and start taking a look at this. And then in later lectures, we'll go much more in depth on Indo-European. We'll take a look at other language language families from around the world. So let's just start with the structure tonight. So here are your definitions. This is language family. This is the most broad we can get. It's the furthest we go back in history. So here's the definition. Collection of languages thought to have descended from a single common ancestral tongue long before recorded history. Now, there are arguments that there might be as many as 100 language families for all the 7,000 languages in the world, so it gives you some context there. One example, you can see it there, is Indo-European. Using the visual there to the right, the pie graph that's there, 45.7% of all people speak an Indo-European language. And so that's huge. And as you would probably expect, it spans a very large geographic area as well, stretching all the way from India through Europe. All of the Americas speak Indo-European languages, or the vast majority of those areas, because there are exceptions, as we will point out. English is part of Indo-European, Spanish, French, German, Hindi in India, Farsi in Iran. These are all languages that are part of a single language family, Indo-European. The next largest, as you can see on there, probably no surprise, is Sino-Tibetan. Sino is Latin for China and includes the most widely spoken first language in the world, and that is Mandarin Chinese. And so that's gives some explanation as to why things are the way that they are, and then it breaks it down further from there. There's another way that we can visualize this, and that is a language tree. So the numbers that are on here are millions of speakers. So the arrow that is pointing there is pointing to the Indo-European language family. So Indo-European has about 2.7 billion people. who speak an Indo-European language. The leaf that includes English has about 328 million people. But that brings up a really big question, because are we talking first language? Are we talking, people who use it as a second language or a lingua franca, like language of trade? Certainly not going to include official languages. And so that makes things a little bit more challenging to try and classify. But it's really, really fascinating. So if you take a look there from the visual, the language family is the trunk of the tree, right? And anyone remember what the next classification level is? Language branches. Language branches are the branches of the tree. You see what they did there? It's pretty clever, right? So when we take a look at Indo-European, it looks like there's only 4 language branches, but that's actually not correct. So let's define what a language branch is and then look at it for Indo-European. And a language branch is a collection of languages related through a common ancestor that existed several thousand years ago. Differences are not as extensive or as old as with language families, and archaeological evidence can confirm that the branches derived from the same family. So if a couple minutes ago you were wondering, but wait a minute, if language families existed long before recorded history, how is there any evidence that they actually existed? Well, that's where these language branches come in. The language branches, there is archaeological evidence, or there is evidence that they derived from a common point, that they came back to a singular point. And that's where we can create the term language family and say that that's where it started. Now, we don't have any evidence preceding that, so in a later lecture when we talk about super families, there's no evidence of that, they're just theories. But we do have evidence that it came back to a common ancestor, and that's the language family. The branches are the languages that derive from that. Okay, and so an example of that would be that in Indo-European there are 8 language branches of the Indo-European language family. Now, side note for just a moment. If you're like, why does he keep talking about Indo-European? There are other language families. You are absolutely, without a doubt, right. So I'll it's important to admit bias when bias exists, and I am more biased towards talking about Indo-European languages. Now, let me explain why. I would expect, and it's a bit of a gamble, that there might be more questions on the AP exam about Indo-European languages, particularly because almost half the world's people speak an Indo-European language. So when you start asking questions about that, you're asking questions that affect a lot more people. And so it is true, it's a bit of a gamble, but these are the ones that because there's so much variety with it, because it is spoken across multiple continents, it's something where I think it is perhaps a little more likely that you will see some questions from Indo-European. Now, don't worry, we are certainly going to talk about other language families, and it is important to talk about other language families. I just tend to think, and again, bit of a gamble, and it's definitely biased, so I am admitting that. I think it's possible we might see some more questions on Indo-European languages than maybe some others. But we'll take a look at all of them. So, first thing we want to do on this particular image is, as we always do, let's ask a couple questions. What type of map are we looking at here? And at what scale are we analyzing this? There's Dora. All right. So, this is a choropleth map, national scale, and we're looking at the 8 branches of Indo-European. So, probably a good idea, because in your notes this is going to be black and white, kind of draw some arrows so you can make sure that you can see it. I'm going to kind of go in the order that they have on there, and we'll talk about this. So on there you can see that the first language family they have is Albanian. That's the darker brown area. And the country that's most widely speaks Albanian, or the Albanian language branch, is Albania. Same with Armenia. You can see that in the area there between the Black Sea and the Caspian Sea in Armenia. The Balto-Slavic language branch is largely in Eastern Europe. That's the gray that you see there, including Russia, Poland, Ukraine, so on and so forth. The Celtic or Celtic language branches have been revived in certain parts of the British Isles. Irish Gaelic is an official language of the Republic of Ireland, but it's also spoken in Scotland, Scotch Gaelic. You can see a little part there in Brittany, in France. So there are some areas, and we'll take a look at that in a little more detail later. The Germanic languages spoken more widely in Northern and Western Europe. Greek, there in Greece. Indo-Iranian, this is the Indo in Indo-European. Most of the other ones are in Europe, but the Indo-Iranian branch is going to include areas like Iran, Afghanistan, Pakistan, India, Bangladesh, and you're going to see languages like Farsi, Hindi that are part of that. And then finally, the Romance languages widely in kind of Southern Europe, but it should be noted there in Romania as well is kind of the outlier, kind of the exception there. One final thing I want to point out is the Basque region of southern France, northern Spain, is an area that is what we classify as an isolated language, the Basque language there, and it is not at all attached to Indo-European. And so that's an important note to make. So notice that area that is not that light green shade there in France and Spain. That is the Basque region, and that's an area that we're going to be talking about a little bit later as well. As far as language groups, a collection of languages within a branch that share a common origin in the relatively recent past. Now, we're not talking like 3 years ago. We're talking, this is still going to be perhaps hundreds of years as far as relatively recent, human history recent. Displaying relatively few differences in grammar and vocabulary. Another example that you can see there, I zoomed in on the earlier image of the language tree, and we can see the Germanic branch of Indo-European is subdivided into two language groups. The Northern Germanic group, which is going to include Swedish, Norwegian, Dutch, and the Western Germanic group, English, German, Dutch, Afrikaans spoken in South Africa, which is actually derived from Dutch. Something like 95% of the vocabulary is derived from Dutch. Now, to be clear, this is not an exhaustive list. These are just the most widely spoken, and we will look at other examples as we go on. Dialect and accent are the two bottom portions of our language classification tree. Dialect, local or regional characteristics of a language, while accent refers to the pronunciation differences of a standard language. A dialect, in addition to pronunciation variation, has distinctive grammar and vocabulary. So I want you to take a look at the order that I placed these in: vocabulary, spelling, pronunciation. And that order is very important because this is the way that is probably most helpful in determining whether or not something is a different language, is a different accent, or is a dialect. So I'll use an example. The biggest difference between American English versus British English is the vocabulary. Yes, there are differences in spelling, without a doubt. Yes, there are certainly differences in pronunciation, sure. But the biggest difference is the difference in vocabulary, and we'll actually look at that in class. And think about even within the United States, we have different dialects as well. We'll look at that in class. Think about the difference between, what you call a carbonated beverage. Do you call it soda? Do you call it pop? Do you call it Coke? That's vocabulary. We all spell soda the same in the United States, but it's the difference in vocabulary that helps to draw those lines, what we call an isogloss, between two different areas. All right. So vocabulary, the most distinctive element of dialect. So that order is important there. And the reason that pronunciation is at the bottom is because pronunciation is more characteristic of just an accent, a distinctive manner of oral expression. It's just the pronunciation. And so again, we'll look at that in class, especially for us in the United States. And then finally, I mentioned isogloss just a moment ago, a boundary that separates regions in which different language usages predominate. Now, an isogloss could be between two language families. It could be between two languages just by themselves. It could be between dialects of a language. And so it's really just any kind of difference in language usage. And when you draw that boundary between them, that is an isogloss. Vernacular is the final piece of this, and it's not a formal part of language classification, but I think it's an important part. It's certainly a fun part to talk about. Vernacular, a characteristic language of a particular group, also known as slang. You may see it as other terms like jargon, or if someone ever says it's colloquial speech, then that is typically referring to vernacular. It's referring to the particular language of a group of people. And so what I want you to do right now is, we're going to have some fun with this. I want you to come up with the vernacular of your particular group. So, students, high school students, right now, what is the characteristic language of your group? Write down some words that you use that maybe your mom and dad don't use. And then, actually, if you want to have some fun, go talk to mom and dad. Press pause on this. Go ask mom and dad, or over dinner, or over breakfast, something like that. Ask mom and dad, what were some of the words that you used, or that they used, that maybe your grandparents, their parents, didn't really understand. And ask them what it meant, and have a conversation about that, because it's really kind of a fun conversation. And to look at the vernacular, the slang, the jargon of a particular group is really kind of funny. And that's where this article comes from. Apparently in Norway, they use the word Texas to mean crazy. And it's an interesting article. Again, this PowerPoint is available on my website, so you can go to the link, or the title of the article is "Why Do Norwegians Use Texas to Mean Crazy?" You can just Google it. And if you were to read this article, a couple questions that I have for you there. Is this a compliment that a particular state kind of evokes this? Or is it disrespectful because what it's evoking is the term crazy? So, it's really kind of an interesting example of vernacular. And we're going to talk about this in class. I'm going to be very interested to see what your particular group came up with. Final slide for tonight looks at essentially how these different languages interact with one another. And so as you go through them, they list either common history or different history, and then mutually intelligible, meaning that you can understand one another, or mutually unintelligible, meaning you cannot. All right? And so, for example, I'm not going to go through all of these. British English and American English, common history, mutually intelligible. There's a common history there, and we can understand each other. English and Hindi, different history, cannot understand one another. But here's the question that I have, and this question goes through for several of these. If I were asking the person who created this, I would ask, what do you mean by different history or common history? Because, for example, English and Hindi are from the same language family. So at a certain point, there was a common history there because it all came from the same family, a common ancestor as far as language is concerned. So that would be my big question with this. And, take a look at some of these, maybe come up with another example of your own that maybe you're a little bit more familiar with, dig into, your background, what you know of, and think, common history, can you understand one another despite a similar history or dissimilar history? And we will be back in class tomorrow to talk about this. Have a wonderful night, everybody. I'll see you then.